You're listening to Small Business, Big Stories, the Queensland Small Business Commissioners podcast with Dominique Lamb. There are more than 482,000 small businesses in Queensland and counting. These are their stories. Today, I am speaking to Scott Millar from BOP Industries, and Scott is by far one of my favourite young business owners. He probably hates being called young, but it is absolutely the truth. And today we get the opportunity to talk to him and hear about his story.
Thanks so much for having me, Dom. I'm super excited to be here and sharing some of my insights and experiences. So BOP Education is set up as a corporation. I own the majority of the shares. I went through an accelerator program, so we have 3% equity with a organisation that ran that accelerator. And for us, we sort of make our money from schools, from government and from industry. So schools will pay us to come in and work with their students. Government will pay us to work with schools in a particular community, and industry will pay us to run branded sort of events and programs for students to showcase careers in their specific industry.
You have a really interesting story. I know it, I've heard it many times, but for our listeners, how did this all begin?
It's actually 10 years ago this year that it began, back as a school business program. I never considered myself a business student, but mum and dad made me take business as a subject when I was in year 9. And as part of that subject, started selling keyrings at local markets, essentially. That grew pretty quickly from going to the Capalaba markets on the south side of Brizzy every Saturday and Sunday and getting excited when I made $40 to selling a few $1,000s worth of keyrings a month on platforms like eBay and Etsy by the time I was finishing year 10. I used the profits from that to start a holographic entertainment company, creating holograms like you see in Star Wars and Iron Man for some pretty big corporates. And as a year 12 student, found myself missing about 5 weeks of school every term, traveling across the country and around the world, working with the likes of IKEA and Specsavers and Audi, getting to put their products and their CEOs and a bunch of politicians inside holograms. So for me, it was definitely a bit of an alternative pathway through school, put me in a really cool position where before I'd finished year 12, sort of had some options on the table saying, well, do I go to university? Do I go work in industry, or do I keep running my own business? And what was initially meant to be a 12-month gap year to see where the business would go has turned into the work we do now at BOP Education. About 5 years after we started our work in the education space, we've worked with 100,000 young people in primary and high school across 36 cities in Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, China, and North America.
How old are you?
I'm 23.
Does that not scare anyone else listening to this? I mean, that is probably more than most people in their entire life would achieve in a 10-year period, which is just incredible. As a business owner, though, I mean, how did your parents feel about, their 17-year-old son deciding to be a business owner as opposed to a doctor, lawyer, accountant, architect?
Yeah, look, I think there've been many conversations, and I think they've felt many different feelings over the years. It was funny. I always joke I never wanted to study business in even year 9 and 10. I had 2 electives I could have picked. I wanted to pick drama and music. I was a massive performing arts nerd, and sort of when it came time for that subject selection, mum and dad had that conversation saying, look, drama and music are cute. Pick one, the other elective is going to be business. And yeah, it sort of got to that point where a few years later I turned around and said, well, maybe I don't want to go to university. Maybe I want to run my business full time. And they're like, ooh, that's a bit scary. Like, he's going against the norm.
Do you identify as being a creative? Like, is that how you would say or describe yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I spend a lot of my time in classrooms working with young people and on stages talking to adults. And one of the questions always is like, where did you get those skills from? And it was really from like, I was a debating kid in school. I was in every musical theatre production, every play. And I genuinely love, creating things, speaking, presenting, telling stories.
Just chatting to you before we started recording, I mean, you talked about, sort of where you grew up in Queensland, but you also mentioned that you grew up in Shanghai. How did that shape some of this, do you think?
I think it's given me a very international perspective where I come from the startup space. Like I initially started in the hologram space and it got involved very heavily in the startup ecosystem. And in the startup space, they talk about what's called a New Zealand mindset, where one of the biggest challenges with Australian startups and businesses is that we go, oh, Australia's a big country, like big landmass, that's a big enough market. But realistically, with a population of about 30 million people, we're a tiny market. And that's why a lot of Australian companies really struggle to scale and get that global like domination that we see from a lot of European and American companies. Whereas what they talk about is that New Zealand mindset, where New Zealand companies from day one, they're like, New Zealand is a tiny country, it is a tiny market, we're building a global business from day one. And I think for me, growing up in China gave me a little bit of that, where I got to see how big the world was. And I think ever since then, I've just had that global mindset of A, I can't wait to get back overseas, but B, we've got to always have that global citizenship, at the core of everything we do, and really keep in mind our place in the world.
When I look at you, you seem like an anomaly to me. So when you look at the stats, right, there's 2.5 million small businesses in Australia. Only 8% are owned by people under the age of 30. And we know that's declined significantly since the 1930s. Why do you think young people aren't interested in running their own businesses?
Oh, look, it's a really tricky one. And I would say young people are definitely interested. I think there's a massive hunger for entrepreneurship among Gen Zs and Gen Alphas. Like, if you look at the research, it shows that about 30 to 40% of young people under the age of 25 here in Australia want to start their own business. I think it's 4 out of 5 want to be their own boss, so about 80%. So I think there's a really big demand for that autonomy that comes with running a business. There's young people that have got ideas that they want to get up and off the ground. I think where they come unstuck is that traditional pathway. And I think it is a really scary thing to go against the grain when you've got 90% of a population that finished school and are going to TAFE or going to uni and going on to further education to say, actually, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to become my own boss. I'm going to start my own business.
Tell me about how you made the decision to sort of engage with experts really early, and why you made that decision when most business owners don't make it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I always joke that I stumbled into business. Like I never set out wanting to be a Mark Zuckerberg or an Elon Musk or anything like that. I just sort of said yes to opportunities, and 10 years later, here I am. But I think because of that, I've always been acutely aware that I'm a young person in business. Like for me, BOP Industries, like my company, was my first job. It's the first time I've ever run a business, and every time the business grows, it's the first time I've ever run a business at that scale and even worked in a business at that scale. So I've always been acutely aware that I don't know what I don't know, and having never run a business before, never worked in a business before, never even gone to university to study business, I've really prioritized mentorship, trying to surround myself with people that are really, really good at what they do, and exactly whether it's they're really good at financial literacy, they're really good at branding and marketing, they're really good at team leadership. And I think even something as simple as just going to networking events, like that was always my strategy, is just ask as many questions as you can, be a sponge, learn as much as you can. Because I think the great thing is that I've really found people really want to help.
Do you think that being young or just simply being different has been sort of a help or a hindrance for you?
It's a really difficult one. And I think the question around age is one that I've struggled with a lot over the past 10 years. I think for me, when I was first starting out, I was going to these networking events at 14, 15 years old. I still remember my first ever suit that I wore to my first ever conference was bought from Big W, and it fit horrendously. I look back on those photos and I was like, bury those. And I think for me, I, at that age, really tried to overcompensate for my age, where I was like, I'm not going to tell anyone like my actual age. I could maybe pass as like early 20s as a 14, 15-year-old. Then I think on the flip side, as I probably hit 16, 17, I found that my age was my point of difference. And I always say one of the things whenever we hire for new staff members, a question we ask them is, why aren't you boring? And it's just really interesting seeing how people answer that question in an interview. And it's something that I encourage everyone to consider is, what's your point of difference? What makes you interesting? And more recently now, I've started taking my age away in certain aspects, where I've started doing more speaking and consulting in the corporate space. And even as a 23-year-old, I found that I'm getting knocked back from different gigs and different opportunities because I'm too young. And a lot of corporates don't take someone in their early 20s seriously. So I've taken the age out again. So I think it's been a really interesting one. I think it can give you a lot of great opportunities, but it also can really restrict you in different ways. So that's where I just say maybe choose when you do and don't share that sort of information.
you're leading a team now, right? How do you go about employing people and managing them?
Yeah, so I am really proud to lead like a very Gen Z team. I keep seeing all the trends. Like there's a lot of TikTok videos and Instagram posts about what it's like to work in a Gen Z workspace. And we are very much all of those. Like we all have our little like Frank Greens and Stanley cups. We go for little like trips to get our coffees in the morning and all that sort of stuff. I'm the youngest on the team. All of the team are older than me, but we all sort of fall into that Gen Z late millennial sort of category. And I think it always is built on mutual trust and respect. I think one thing that I'm really passionate about is the concept of intergenerational leadership. And whilst for us, all of our team are Gen Z, the majority of our clients are those sort of Gen X and baby boomers. Like they're those school leaders, they're those executives that are sort of in towards the end of their career, but are really, really established. And we've got some really great collaborations with them. And it's always built on mutual trust and mutual respect. So I think that's where the best opportunities come from in any workforce, is when you get different generations together, bringing different perspectives, bringing different skill sets. You can get some really cool ideas coming out.
So tell me what BOP education does specifically, because it's easy to say. I've trained 100,000 students. I've traveled the world. I'm working with these really big companies, but I'm sure people are thinking, but what is this 23-year-old training 100,000 people in?
Yeah, so for us, our core is sort of innovation, entrepreneurship, STEM. And if you have a look at a lot of the research, it says that to be successful in the workforce of the future, you need a lot of skills in critical and creative thinking, in reasoning, in problem solving, in communication, in collaboration. Those sort of skills that you think would be the basics that everyone learns at some point in their life. But if you actually look at the curriculum, there's nowhere that explicitly teaches those sort of skills. It's just sort of assumed that at some point along your schooling journey, you'd probably learn communication skills, or you'd probably learn critical thinking skills or adaptability. We do a lot of work going into schools, delivering workshops. We build curriculum that teachers deliver. We host events and conferences to show young people how they can build these skills, show them the different careers, and show teachers how they can help young people develop those skills. And for us, it's really looking at how can you get young people embracing an innovation mindset, give them a really big, really meaty challenge and say, well, how do you solve that? But also giving them those real world challenges. For example, one of the programs we run, we pitch students different challenges set by leading organizations. And we say to them, look, how would you fix this problem? For example, one of them looking at the future of transport, saying, what do you think the future of transport should look like in Brisbane in the next 30 years? What works, what doesn't work, and how do we incorporate things like hyperloops? How do we incorporate things like low orbit space travel? What does the future of flying look like? All these things. And along that way, students learning all the different career pathways they didn't know they could have inside that particular industry, but also learning to think outside of the box when it comes to tackling these real challenges that our largest organizations are facing.
You spend your life teaching other people how to deal with sort of Gen Z, Alpha, all of those things. I hear lots on my travels I hear two things. I hear schools push kids to become professionals and go to university, or alternatively, I hear these kids just want to be influencers. They don't want to do anything. They don't know how to work anymore. What do you tell people when they ask you these questions?
Oh, I think it's such an interesting one. Like if you ask anyone that has a Gen Z in their team, they'll probably roll their eyes and go, oh, Gen Z, like they're lazy, they're unmotivated, they don't want to work. And then I think on the flip side, if you talk to any Gen Z that has a baby boomer on their team, they'll say, well, I would love to see them log out of their iCloud account and log back in again. So I think there's a lot of tension between those generations and there's a lot of misunderstanding. And if you look at the workforce today, we've got 5 generations in the workforce. The retirement age is increasing. And on the flip side, we've got more young people starting in the workforce earlier. I think for any manager that's looking to engage Generation Z, the main things to consider are they're looking for flexibility. I had one of my friends the other day was applying for roles, got offered 2 jobs. One of them offered $10,000 a year more in salary, but it was full-time in the office. One offered $10,000 a year less in salary, but he could work from home 2 days a week. And he took a $10,000 pay cut to work from home 2 days a week. So I think any employer looking to engage top talent needs to find a way to accommodate that. I also think young people are looking to have a sense of ownership or belonging within a team. I think for so long, young people have watched their parents miss birthdays, miss presentations, miss awards nights because they're stuck at work and because their boss has said, no, I need you to stay later, I need you to work harder, or for their parent just to potentially be fired or made redundant without even a second look. And I think because of that, young people have said, well, I'm not going to kill myself for a company that could replace me tomorrow. But I think on the flip side, if an organization or a manager can give a young person that sense of a bit of ownership, like a bit of a say in how things are done and that feeling that they are valued, they're going to really go above and beyond for that organization because they feel that sense of worth. So I think those are two really key things that young people look for is the flexibility, but also the sense that they belong and they won't be replaced tomorrow. And I think on the flip side, for any Gen Zs listening, you've really got to work to understand the different generations. I think every generation brings so much knowledge, so much wisdom, and such a unique perspective. And there's such a value in the intergenerational collaborations there. And as a young person, you can learn so much from that. And I really would say, like, try and find those mentors. At the end of the day, it's not necessarily what you know, it's all about who you know. So if you can network with the other people in your organizations, if you leave a good taste in their mouth, a good reputation that, wow, that young person was really willing to work, like willing to collaborate, willing to learn, willing to take feedback, you'll go a really long way.
And obviously this is not the final iteration of, say, BOP education, right? Like it's gone from keyrings to holograms to now I'm in education. What do you think the next iteration of Scott Millar will look like?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think for me, it's always come down to figuring out what I love to do. Quite often when I talk to different audiences, I talk about the concept of an ikigai, which is a Japanese concept that means your true purpose. And in your ikigai, you've essentially got a 4-way Venn diagram, 4 circles that overlap. And you should list down what are the things you're good at? What are the things you love to do? What can you get paid for? And what does the world need? And if you can find something, some sort of a job, a vocation that combines those 4 things, that is your true purpose. What the next iteration looks like, I'm not quite sure. I think there's still so much that needs to be done in the Gen Z, Gen Alpha space as our young people go through school and start to enter the workforce. And we're already seeing organizations, I guess, struggling to grapple with that. So I'm excited to spend a little bit more time here. I'm really enjoying it.
Listening to you, it sounds like sort of the dream process for a small business, right? Like, what are the biggest challenges that you face?
Look, I think for us, we've faced so many challenges, and whilst it may sound like it has been that dream process, it absolutely hasn't been. I think there have been so many tears, so many late nights, so many times sitting there at 3 a.m, unable to fall asleep, going, is my business going to survive next week? Is it going to survive the end of this month? Some of the biggest challenges I've really faced have been understanding my own skill set as a business owner and understanding, I think, society's expectations as to what a business owner should be doing. I found it after finishing school, and over the past few years, I had this idea in my mind that to be a business owner and to run a scalable business, you've got to spend all of your time like in the office, looking at spreadsheets, managing budgets, managing team, looking at strategy. And I tried that and I hated it. I am at my happiest when I'm having conversations with people, when I'm presenting in classrooms, when I'm on stages, and I actually really hate being in the office and having to look at budgets. And I know my accountants and bookkeeper will absolutely tell you that I'm a nightmare to get a hold of because they send me these emails and I'm like, oh, I don't really want to look at that. But I think for me, that's honestly been a really big challenge and has ended me up in some really sticky situations where I've neglected the business management side of things and ended up realizing that I really shouldn't have neglected it because someone will come knocking and say, hey, what's going on here? And I was like, oh, bit of a dumpster fire, but it's fine. So I think for me, what I've done to sort of remedy that is find people that are sort of yin to my yang. So I use the example, I have an operations manager. She's absolutely fantastic and she's the ultimate yin to my yang. And I knew that when I think within her first month or two, we had gotten a contract with a government organization and they emailed back saying, yeah, we need about 60 pages worth of documentation, like risk assessments, mitigation strategies, all of this sort of like governance stuff. And I looked at it, I was like, oh God, I could literally think of nothing worse. And she, within her first month, was like, oh my God, this is my Christmas. Like, leave me for the week, it'll be done. And I'm getting messages from her at like 10 p.m. at night. She's like, oh my gosh, I just got bored, so I put together a risk assessment form. How cool is this? And I was like, I'm so glad you love this because I could think of nothing worse. And now we've got like, she's been with the team for a number of years now and I trust her like with my life. And we've got that understanding where I'm like, look, you send me out, like you put me on the road, you work me as hard as you need to work me, but please just like hold down the business management side of things because I know that that's not my strength.
And what's your top tip for sort of any business owner that's listening?
My top tip for any business owner listening would relate to technology adoption. I think so often we're hearing about that we're living in an innovation economy and you've got to innovate or disrupt or die. And I think there's a lot of pressure for business owners these days to integrate technology in their business, to like totally throw the rulebook out and try new things. My advice for any business owner would be to innovate responsibly. And I think that's to ask the question, just because we can, does it mean we should? Whether that is creating a new product offering, whether that's integrating a piece of technology or redoing your internal processes. Is this a good thing for our customers? Is this a good thing for our brand? Is this a good thing for our business overall? And I think that's something we see across the board. I don't think you can future-proof a business. I think you can build a culture that makes you more likely to survive in the future, and it really comes down to adaptability. I think it's always running small experiments as well on the side. Like, have your core business, have your core product, the thing that pays your bills, helps you make payroll every week, but then be running a lot of little experiments to just see what works and to see what doesn't.
Do you have a mantra that you live by that like sort of keeps you going?
I do. So I have this mantra, and any student that's ever been in a program with me will know this one because I always start every keynote I do with it. It says that great things never come from comfort zones. When you think about it, we as humans, we're wired to sit inside our comfort zone. We do something, we do it well, and we say, yeah, that's safe, that's comfortable. I'm going to do the same thing again and again and again. But what I always remind myself when I find myself getting comfortable is, how are you achieving something great? Like, what are you doing? You've hit that comfort zone. How can you push yourself just a little bit? Like, do a little bit more, go a little bit extra, do a little bit, something a little bit different just to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, because you never know where it's going to take you.
Great. Thanks for listening to Small Business, Big Stories. I hope today's discussion finds the people who need it. And for more inspiration on how to transform your small business, keep tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favourite platform. And if you have a business question for myself or my guests, we'd love to hear from you. Just follow the link in our show notes and send us an email. I'm Dominique Lamb, the Queensland Small Business Commissioner. Until next time.